Very good. Well, good evening. So welcome once again to our class tonight. So I'm very glad to see you all here tonight. And we have some new people to who join us tonight also. So I know that there were last week a number of people had difficulty logging in. So that's why I make sure that this time to contact them in advance and ask them to call me immediately if they had an issue to come to join us. So hopefully this made it easier for everyone to join us tonight. Anyway, so last week we spent our discussion reflecting upon the nature of heaven. So we explore several foundational questions. So we began with the questions with the reasons why heaven must exist at all, based on both divine revelation and reason. And so we also touch on the differences between the Catholic understanding of heaven and the typical Protestant view on heaven. And so especially in regard to the resurrection of the body, the communion of saints, the final fulfillment of creation, etc. Another important point that we discussed about was the idea that heaven is both a place and a state, because there's a big dispute among theologians whether it's a place or a state. But so it is. I said that it is both. It is a real objective place, where the blessed dwell with God, and at the same time, it is a spiritual state, a spiritual state of perfect union with God. So it's not only just a place, but it's both, a place and a state. And so heaven is not a feeling. It's not just a feeling, nor it is only just a symbolic idea, but it is the true homeland of the saints, where body and soul will experience the fullness of joy in heaven. And so we also consider a question that often arises. So people, they often ask this question: will there be animals in heaven? Will there be flowers in heaven? So we did talk about it. Just explain, that in the Catholic theology, so animals and plants, they don't go to heaven, the way humans do, and this is because they don't possess the rational soul. So they don't have intellect and will. They don't have free will. They don't have intellect, and therefore they cannot really know and love God in the way that we can. So they cannot receive grace. They cannot cooperate with grace. They cannot make moral choices. And so for this reason, they cannot experience beatitude or enter heaven, by their own passing from this world. But however, scripture and traditions of the church is very clear, clearly suggest that, God may choose to adorn the new creation with renewed forms of animals, plants, natural beauty, etc. So not as glorified souls as what human being will be, but as the part of the perfect harmony of his new renewed creation. So in other words, God may create them, anew in heaven, not because they are rewarded in heaven, but they are simply because just God wants to manifest the fullness of his goodness and wisdom and creativity and the perfection of the new heavens and earth. And so they contribute to the beauty of heaven, but in the fundamentally different way from human beings, who are capable of enjoying God himself and entering into eternal happiness. Tonight, we will take the next step in our study, and also we will be focusing on the happiness of heaven. When we say that heaven is a place of perfect happiness, what does it really mean? What kind of happiness do the saints actually experience there? And so what is that happiness, and what is that consists, and why is that happiness perfect, complete, and unending? Why is that? So we'll explore all these things. So we'll explore, what theologians, especially St. Thomas, call the beatific vision. which is the direct and the immediate seeing of God. So how this vision, how this beatific vision transforms the soul and fills the deepest desires of our hearts and ultimately becomes the source of joy beyond anything we can imagine in this life. Now, when we talk about happiness, we have to understand, what true happiness is. Then we will see why earthly joys, never fully satisfy us, and how the happiness of heaven fulfills every longing of the human heart in a way that is both complete and eternal. Now, when we use the word happiness in today's word, in today's world, we a lot of times I think we mean something we enjoy. Something, for example, that something is pleasant or something is comforting or exciting. Sometimes we even use the word, interchangeably with pleasure. For example, we will say we are happy, when we eat a good meal, or when we achieve a goal, or we get promoted, in our job, or we spend time with people, we love, and then we will say, well, we are so happy. So yes, these are good experiences. But St. Thomas tells us, that such experiences, this such happiness is only the surface. There is not, it is not the deepest, it's not the truest happiness that the human heart longs for. Now, St. Thomas gives a very precise but very simple definition of happiness. So our complete happiness. Now he says, in the Summa, in the second part of the second part, so in question 1, he says, the beatitude, happiness. Happiness is what? Happiness is that perfect good which completely satisfies the desire of a rational creature. It's very short, very simple, but at the same time very precise. It's a perfect good which completely satisfies the desires of a rational creature. Now, so it's a simple term, so true happiness is found only in a good so perfect that it leaves nothing else to be desired. In other words, it fills the soul entirely. So it allows every longing of the heart to come to peaceful rest. And so he explains the reason why created things cannot give us perfect happiness. That he examines some of the common things, people they chase in life. For example, pleasure, riches, fame, power, honor, knowledge, all these kind of things. So he show it bit by bit. So pleasure. There's another article about why riches are not the ultimate end, the ultimate happiness. And so basically, he gives some several reasons. So the first reason is that he said, well, because these things they are temporary. So that's why they cannot be our ultimate end. We cannot be our ultimate happiness because all these things they are temporary. Because we know that pleasures sometimes we have pleasures, but we fade. Or riches can be lost, or honor depends on others' opinions. Health and beauty vanish with time. We get older, So even knowledge can be forgotten or proven incomplete. And so, in other words, anything that can be taken away cannot be our ultimate happiness. And the second reason he says, because these things they are limited. They're limited. And so every created good has boundaries. So it gives us only so much joy and no more. So for example, no matter how much pleasure we experience, it ends at some point. Wealth cannot solve the deepest loneliness or fear, or power brings responsibility and often even anxiety. When we get more power, we get more anxious. People in high places, they often they get very anxious. Or knowledge only makes us aware of how much we do not know. So once you know something, you actually you don't know a lot of things, and that's why it's limited. And the third reason he gives is that the, all these temporary things, they awaken only new desires rather than fulfilling them. So they are not fulfilling, but they are actually just awaken new desires in us. So once we get power, for example, we want more power. Once we want to gain more, we gain money. We have money, and we want more money. When we gain knowledge, we discover infinite mysteries, still unknown, and so we get more, want to study more. Or created goods, so expand our thirst. They don't actually quench it. And the next reason that St. Thomas gives is that all these things, they cannot really touch the deepest part of the human soul. So because bodies enjoy bodily pleasures, but however, we as human, we are not only just bodies. We are just not only just physical bodies. We are composite of of body and soul, and that's why we have a soul. And the soul, being spiritual, ultimately would hunger for something spiritual, eternal, and infinite. And so therefore the soul wants truth without error. The soul wants goodness without limits. The soul wants love without fear. The soul wants beauty that never fades. And so no created things therefore can give us all of that. And so therefore St. Thomas, at the end of his analysis, he concludes that only the uncreated and the infinite God, the infinite good, the goodness himself, God himself, can satisfy the desire of a rational creature. So happiness is something which can satisfy the desire of a rational creature. And so when we talk about real happiness, therefore, so we are talking about the deepest kind, the kind that feels the highest parts of our rational, our human soul, which has our intellect, which wants to know, and our will, which wants to love and to possess what is truly good. Now, St. Thomas so help us to see this very clearly. So he says the intellect is made for truth, and truth enters the mind when the mind matches itself to reality. And meanwhile, the will is made for the good, for goodness. And the good is not just an idea floating in our head, but actually it exists in real things. And so step by step, here is what happened. And also the intellect, starts by wanting to understand things. It wants clear, accurate, complete knowledge. And in this life, we do get moments of satisfaction, solving a problems, or gaining some insights, or understanding something beautiful. We do get some satisfaction. But the problem is that every time, when the mind reaches one level, it immediately sees that there is a more beyond it. There is another level, or there are more levels on top of it. And so the horizon keeps moving. So the intellect is always open, always hungry for more. And at the same time, the will is not content, with merely just thinking about the good, but it wants the real good in its hands. And so something, it can truly embrace and cause it own. He said he wants to possess the good also. He doesn't want to just have the good, the thinking about the good, but it's also to possess that good. And here's the problem, so every created thing is limited because of that. So the intellect can only know created things in a limited way, and the will can only hold on to them in a very limited way. And so that's why even the best things in this world, pleasure, success, honor, knowledge, relationships, never fully satisfy us. And they are good things, of course, but they always leave something missing. They quietly remind the soul that it was made for something more, something bigger. And that's why God has to step in, because we naturally we were made for something more, we were made for something bigger. And so that's why we cannot reach it. And that's why God has to step in. He has to give us grace to lift both our intellect and will to a higher level. So he has to give the intellect a supernatural light so it can understand divine realities. And he has to infuse our will with charity so it can actually desire God as its final end, final goal. And so all of this leads towards the ultimate fulfillment. And this ultimate fulfillment is called the beatific vision. So it's in that moment, so the intellect finally sees God directly as he is, with perfect clarity. And the will finally possesses God as the infinite good at one in an act of complete love. And so everything the soul was made for, knowing and loving, is in heaven, so it's achieved at once. And because God is infinite, so the satisfaction is real, is total, is complete. So every part of us is filled to the brim, nothing missing, nothing undone, nothing. And even though we remain finite creatures, we don't become angels, we don't become God in heaven. We remain finite creatures, but there's nothing missing. And so at the end, so real happiness happens when our intellect fully knows truth fully, completely, and our will finally holds the supreme good. So anything less than God's own life shared with us is only a small taste. It's only a hint of the real thing. And that's why, only God, the infinite truth and the infinite goodness himself can ever really satisfy the deepest longings of our mind and our hearts. And so it is for this reason. So Saint Augustine expressed this truth beautifully, in his book, the Confessions. And he says, if a man knows thee, O God, and also knows also know all other things, he is blessed. But if he knows all else and does not know you, he is not blessed. And if knowing you, he praises you not for your gifts, he is ungrateful. So it is what he says. In other words, so you can know everything about the universe, but without knowing God, you are not truly happy in this world. So God is the supreme good of the soul, and without him, everything else loses meaning. So because of this, so St. Thomas explains that there are actually two kinds of happiness, and the first is what he calls natural happiness. And natural happiness, he says, that even if God had created us in a purely natural state, so without grace, without the supernatural calling to become his children, we will still naturally desire him as our creator. And so in that situation, so by living virtuously or remain faithful to what reason can know, we would arrive at a genuine but limited kind of happiness. We'll be happy. So I think a lot of people, they keep seeking for the truth. They live a virtuous life. They remain, they are faithful to what reason or conscience, tells them to live, how they live their life. They ultimately they would arrive at a genuine and a limit, a certain kind of happiness. Yeah. But so because our intellect would come to know God in a natural way. So, for example, we can know God in a natural way by reflecting on creation. We look at creation, we think that it must be God. There must be a God, creating all these things. And we recognize his power, or recognize his wisdom, or recognize his goodness just by reflecting on creatures, by the nature of things. And so with the people, they can know God in a natural way, in this way. At the end, they will be happy. And this is called natural happiness. This knowledge also will be true, will be clear, will be free from mistakes, but yet, still limited, because it will never grasp God as he truly is. And so from this knowledge would flow a natural love of God. So not the intimate love of children, toward a father, like the Christians, but the respectful, grateful love of a good servant, has for a perfect master. And this kind of happiness will be real and will be fulfilling in its own order. But St. Thomas, he stresses that it would never be the highest, would never be the highest happiness possible, because it actually is stopped short of seeing and loving God in the way grace make possible. And so that's why he says, God didn't just make us to be naturally happy, and in fact, he had something way bigger in mind. He said, because he called us to a supernatural happiness. Supernatural happiness is a kind of joy that goes far beyond anything our natural powers could reach, and even beyond what the angels experience. And so this supernatural happiness is not just about enjoying what God gives us, but rather it is about sharing in God's own happiness. We are sharing in his happiness. So the joy with which he knows himself, the love with which he loves himself from all eternity, and he is sharing with us. And so it is the gift that goes beyond anything we can earn, anything we can achieve on our own. So it is a pure grace. And because of this, so we are invited to see God directly, face to face, not just through creations or images, in what the church calls this beatific vision. Now, so we are called to love him just as he loves himself, with a love that is elevated, purified, and strengthened by divine charity. And so our hearts expanded by grace, elevated by grace, now long for something higher than anything natural can give, and only God himself, the infinite goodness himself, can fill that longing. So we desire for something greater, and now it's all being fulfilled, in heaven. In other words, supernatural happiness is having our deepest desires finally satisfied. So not partially, not temporarily, but completely and entirely. So in communion with God himself. And that is heaven. Heaven is a state of perfect and eternal happiness in which the soul sees God directly, intuitively, loves him completely, and shares in his own divine life. And that is heaven. Now, so in simple terms, so the ultimate happiness in heaven is what we call the beatific vision. It's the ultimate happiness in heaven that we call, is called beatific vision. Now, a lot of times, when people they talk about beatific vision, they will think that heaven is a place, where we just see God, and doing nothing, and just look at God the whole time, and don't really understand what that means. When we say that we see God face to face, what does it even mean? So a lot of times they just picture this, just looking at something incredibly beautiful, and they just can't, turn away their sight, and so that's why it is important, so that's why you cannot, if you don't understand this concept, basically you cannot explain why it makes people happy and what is actually happening in heaven. And even people who know heaven involves seeing God, often miss the deeper meaning behind the mystery of the beatific vision, and that's a problem. So and that's why it is important for us to get a clear picture, using what the church teaches. Like the beatific vision is not just one part of heaven, and we have to remember that. So it is not one part of heaven. Beatific vision is the heart of heaven, the very source of perfect and complete joy of heaven. It is this beatific vision. So it is because the saints, they see God directly, that they can enjoy all the other blessings and delights that surround God's throne. And without this vision, so even those secondary joys wouldn't be truly possible. The theologians, they usually explain the happiness of heaven by dividing it into two kinds. And it really helps to understand the difference. Now, first, they said that, and there is what they call essential happiness. So the beatific vision is divided into two kinds, and this kind is an essential happiness, and that is the real heart of heaven, the very heart of what makes it paradise, happiness. Essential happiness is what the soul receives directly from God in the beatific vision. When we see him face to face, know him completely, love him without any limit, and this joy doesn't depend on anything outside of God. So it doesn't change, it doesn't rise, it doesn't fall, it never runs out. So it is pure, perfect, unshakable joy coming straight from God's own life into the soul. And that's why it's called essential. It is the essence of heaven itself. That's why it's called essential joy. It's essential happiness, or sometimes called. And then there is another kind, which theologians, they call accidental happiness. Now, accidental doesn't mean by accident or unimportant. It actually means extra, additional joys that God generously gives on top of the beatific vision. Now, so this comes from created things and events. So, for example, where the saints they see, when they see the joy, the saints, that when they see the sinners, they repent on earth. When they and the happiness of being reunited with loved ones, or the beauty of renewed creation, the fellowship of saints and angels. When they see the angels and saints in heaven, they will have this accidental joy, this happiness. And so when our Lord says, there is joy in heaven over one sinner who repents, and so that is what he is talking about. He is talking about this kind of joy, this accidental joy, this accidental happiness, something new happening that brings a fresh delight to the saints, and this accidental joy. And so I will tell you more in a minute. Now, he is the important detail. So even if one of these events never happened, say, for example, a sinner never repented, but the saints in heaven will still be perfectly happy, because their essential happiness, which comes from seeing God face to face, would remain completely untouched. So nothing can disturb, nothing can diminish that primary joy. And even more, the saints can enjoy these extra joys only because they already have the beatific vision. So without seeing God directly, no created thing, no things, no beauty, no happy event could ever bring them any any real happiness. Only God can make the soul blessed. And so, and once God fills the soul with His own life, then all these created joys become meaningful, becomes beautiful, delightful, etc. And so, to understand this more clearly, just give you an example. So just to give you an example to so that you can will understand it more, perhaps more. For example, a person, let's say a person who enjoys perfect physical and mental health, not only finds joy in being alive, but also takes pleasure in nature, or music, or friendships, or readings, or many activities. Now imagine that this person, loses his health and becomes bedridden, and so he no longer enjoys life as he once did. And even the things he used to love, be beautiful scenery, or the books that he used to love reading, or good company, now give him little or no pleasure. So his loss of health has taken away the capacity to enjoy life's pleasures. And therefore we say that good health is essential. So not only for life, but also for enjoying the good things of life. So in a similar way, it's the same thing. The beatific vision in heaven is like the health of the soul. It is absolutely necessary, not only for living the life of heaven, but also for being able to delight, in all the secondary accidental glories that God surrounds His soul, His saints with. Now, haven't spoken for such a long time, so what exactly is the beatific vision then? Is it just, as I said, is it just staring at God, forever, like some eternal surprise moment? And is it just so? Is it a sight, so overwhelming that we will lose ourselves in amazement, drifting into a never-ending trance? So no, so not, of course, not really. The term beatific vision actually, comes from these three Latin words: beatus, meaning happy; facio, meaning I make; and visio, meaning a sight. So when we put them all together, it literally means a sight that makes you happy. So in other words, it is not just looking at something beautiful. It is but it is a direct, it is a personal encounter with God that, by its very nature, removes all sadness, wipes out all our sufferings, and fills the soul with perfect joy. And it is the happiness itself flowing straight from God into us. Now, to understand it better, theologians, they break this beatific vision down into three essential acts. So all of which actually work together. So take away even one element, it wouldn't be complete. They said that, beatific vision has these three elements. The first is the sight of God. So really seeing God, seeing Him, not through um, symbols, pictures, or creatures, but directly, intuitively, face to face. Now the second is the love of God. The love of God. So beatific vision, also the second element is the love of God. So our soul responding in perfect love to His infinite goodness. And the third is the enjoyment of God. So the soul's delight in fully possessing and resting in the eternal goodness. And so each of these acts, is distinct, but they are inseparable, forming the complete and the perfect happiness that is heaven. And so we will take a look, take a look at each of them, and to see how they actually fit together. Now, the first and the most basic part of beatific vision isn't about just sitting in a golden palace, staring in the sky, So it is far more profound. It is seeing God Himself, not with our physical eyes, but God is because God is a pure spirit, but we only with our intellect, our reason, the highest part of our soul. Now in heaven, our intellect is lifted and and strengthened by what the theologians they call the light of glory. It's called the lumen gloriae, the light of glory, which is a supernatural gift that makes it possible for the mind to behold God directly as He is. And that's why the scripture, that's what the scripture means, when it talks about seeing God face to face. In the book of Revelation, when it talks about seeing God face to face, it's from the book of Revelation, chapter 22, verse 4. So, or when Christ says, the angels always behold the face of my Father in heaven, the face to face, immediate, intuitive, looking at God, so seeing God face to face. So, the New Catechism explains it well, very well. It says, those who die in God's grace and friendship and are perfectly purified, live forever with Christ. They are like God forever, for they see Him as He is. And that is the beatific vision. So, and now we understand, we have to understand that in this world, on earth, we can only know God indirectly. So we see Him through creation. And the other way that we know God is by faith. We by faith through images, through concepts, or through mystical experiences, whatever. So, but it's through faith. Even the most profound mystical encounters are only tiny glimpses of the real thing. In heaven, although the soul experiences God immediately and intuitively, so, and meaning it knows Him directly without needing to reason things out step by step and perfectly. So every mystery is unveiled, is revealed, and every question answered, every longing for truth satisfied. So compared to this, all the knowledge we can gain in this life, even years of study or deep contemplation, is like a single flickering candle, again against the blazing noonday sun, like that. It's like that quick. And so this direct vision of God is not just the first step towards happiness in heaven. It is the source of everything else. So as I explained just now, so it is the essential, it is the essence of beatific vision. It's the essence of heaven. And think of it like the sun. The sun gives light, warmth, life to the world, and we remove the sun, and everything falls into darkness and cold. So in the same way, if God were somehow withdrawn from the blessed, so heaven itself would disappear. So every joy, every love, every delight in heaven flows from this first perfect sight, the vision. But knowing God fully, we know that it's not enough to satisfy the soul. So knowledge alone cannot complete us. We need another part, so we as we in our spiritual life, knowledge is insufficient. So we have knowledge, but we if we have there's no love, we cannot go to heaven, you see. And so the soul wants more than understanding, which means it wants to cling to love, clings to God, the goodness, to love Him, to rest in Him. And that's why the beatific vision naturally leads to two more acts. And first is love and enjoyment. So seeing God sparks a love that can never end, and that love blossoms into the deepest the most complete joy we can imagine. Now, theologians they also distinguish between what they call the primary and the secondary objects of beatific vision. What are they? What are they? The primary object is, of course, is, as I said, is God Himself. So it's basically is like essential and accidental. But they call it primary and secondary. So primary object is God Himself. It's directly, immediately, perfectly see Him, and so so it's a primary object is God. The saint sees God's very essence, by immediate intuition, not through any images, not through any created representations. So in seeing Him, they behold all His divine perfections and the three persons of the Trinity in perfect unity and distinction. So they can also perceive in a general way the entire order of possible creation. So everything that could exist by God's will, they all know that it is because of they see God, they see God, and therefore they know all the other things. But they are not omniscience. They are not become all knowing like God. That because even though we people that go to heaven doesn't mean that they become God. They still remain as human, so they are not all knowing. So the actual decrees of God in time are revealed only if He chooses. There's something that is still mysterious that we cannot understand unless He reveals to us. And so this awareness of their own finitude, actually, this finitude before the infinite majesty of God is actually the perfect humility. That's why in heaven, all things are humble because they know there's some knowledge they don't have. Only God reveals to them, they will know. And so they're perfectly humble and they're perfectly happy. And that is what heaven is, the things they enjoy. Um, but alongside this, theologians they also speak of these secondary objects. The secondary objects, they are the things that are created. So yet they are seen in and through God. So these are not independent sources of happiness in themselves, but they are meaningful only because they reflect God's power. They reflect God's will. They reflect God's goodness. And because the blessed already participate in God through the beatific vision, and therefore they see also they see these things. Now there are two main ways that the blessed perceive these secondary objects. The theologians they said, and so the first one is directly. They can directly perceive these secondary objects. There's sometimes, God Himself makes certain created realities immediately known to the soul. So, this is a direct disclosure from God, not mediated by images or concepts. So, just give you an example. For example, the soul. So the soul may directly see some aspects of the order of creation or the perfection of creatures in their ideal form. So all shining in God's presence. So the soul experiences them not as separate from God, but as part of the fullness of His infinite reality. So they know God's plan. They know God's plan. For all creatures, for all creation. But the other way is, that the things they see, these perceive these secondary objects is through causality. So oftentimes, the soul perceives created things as effects of God's first cause. So in other words, the blessed, the saints, they see them in God as their source or origin. And so, for example, a saint might recognize the souls of other blessed, other saints, or other blessed people, or the prayers offered by the faithful on earth. So, understanding that these as manifestation of God's power, mercy, and love. And so they see these things as God's work and gift, and not as independent objects of joy. So the saint will recognize the souls of other blessed people, um, they are, because they are perhaps offered by the favor on earth, and they will see those things, as to see that it's God's plan, you know. And so these secondary objects include things of the saints naturally care about. So for example, so related to the incarnation, the redemption, the sacraments, everything they believe and trusted on earth becomes clear in heaven. So they understand all these things, why God actually came to the world to save us. So the saints, they see these secondary objects, and so they understand perfectly, what was hidden in faith, seeing in it also, seeing it all in relation to God Himself. So people, they pray, and now the prayers being answered, by God. So they see the reason. They see how come God didn't grant the request, at that moment, only at later time. So they see all these things, that is in God's plan. It's the mysteries of faith. The saints, they also recognize and rejoice, with those they love on earth. The feeling deep communion with them. So especially when they see these people, they also go to heaven. They also, they are safe, and they recognize that, they rejoice also. So they share in the joy of being united, not in isolation, but as part of the essential eternal family of God. So they also see other the souls that they know on earth, they perhaps their children, or their parents, or their friends. Now they see them, and they know that they are safe, and they also give them happiness. Or the saints are also aware of the devotion and the honor offered to them by those on earth. So they rejoice in seeing God glorified in these acts, and they can share in the ongoing life of God's people in ways we can barely imagine. So they can see, that people, they pray to the saints, for example, and ultimately the grace was granted. They see these things, they also we get they will also have joy as well, in the happiness as well. The saints, they will enjoy, we see that. And so most importantly, so all this secondary joy, so as I said, they all depend on the primary vision of God, the beatific vision. So without seeing God directly, none of these created things could ever bring happiness. So and that's why it is important to understand that. Now, so the secondary object enrich the beatific vision, but they do so only because the soul is already united with God. So they are like the many reflections of sunlight in crystal or in mirrors. So the sunlight itself is essential, but the sun is the source of all the brilliance. Without the sun, the reflections are meaningless. So in the same way, so the beatific vision is the source. So secondary objects only provide additional delight and richness. So only enhancing the soul's participation in the infinite happiness of heaven, without ever replacing or diminishing the essential joy of God Himself. And so it is true that the saints, they truly see God. But it is important to know that they do not comprehend Him fully. So they even though they have beatific vision, they see God's plan. They see God face to face, immediately. But at the same time, they don't comprehend Him fully, because God is ultimately, He is infinitely incomprehensible to every created intellect. No creature, not even angelic creatures or human creatures, can ever grasp God's essence as he understands himself. So, and this limitation is not due to imperfection, in their vision. It is only because there is the infinite distance between the creator and his creatures. There's an infinite gap there, and that's why they are not able to see everything, to comprehend God in the most holy Trinity. To understand fully um, um, what God, the nature of God, really. And so, as I said, the second part of the vision. And the second part of the beatific vision is all about love. It's this perfect, spontaneous, um, overwhelming love. And this love is not something we have to force or to strain to feel, but it flows naturally. It flows, just from seeing God directly. Once we see God, is the ultimate. We know that God is the infinite goodness, and once we know that it's good, and we love it. you know and so when the soul finally beholds God as he truly is, his infinite beauty, his boundless goodness, his unending love, it becomes impossible not to respond with full and all-encompassing love. It is like, standing next to a blazing furnace. To see that fire and feel nothing would be absurd. You can't. It's even impossible. You have to respond to it. And so in the same way, to see God and not love Him would be unimaginable. So it's the same thing. You cannot. So in heaven, therefore, we will talk about next time. When you see God, you cannot deny Him. You cannot deny Him anymore. So that's why in heaven, you always in heaven. Heaven is you are always in heaven. So you won't be in heaven and then you will go down to the other level to the purgatory or to hell. You can't, because you cannot deny Him. Once you see Him, you will always love Him. You always want to be with Him. And so that's why it is always, saints are always in heaven. Once they are in heaven, they will always be in heaven. Now here, so we understand that here on earth things are very different. Our knowledge of God is always limited, as I said, and so we see Him, indirectly, through creation, or through Scripture, or through faith. But because of this, we can resist Him. We can say no to Him. We can neglect Him. We can even turn away from Him. We can choose to withhold our love